I slept with our nanny. I did not know it was her. I thought it was my wife. On a Saturday evening, I came home drunk. I went upstairs to my own bedroom. I got into my own bed. And the woman lying there, I assumed, the way any husband assumes in his own home, was my wife Evelyn. I never turned on the light. I never looked. I was wrong. And that one night, that one moment of blindness, became the stone that shattered everything I had spent 30 years building, my marriage, my family, the life that every person in our neighborhood held up as the example of what love was supposed to look like. But here is the part that will stay with you. Here is the part one could never have imagined when I was standing at that altar with Evelyn, promising her everything. 20 years after that night, a woman knocked on my front door with a daughter she said was mine. My wife found out. My children found out. And every single one of them stopped speaking to me. For 2 years, I sat in my own house like a ghost, invisible to the people I loved most in this world. I lost my wife. I nearly lost my life. And the only person left standing beside me when everything fell apart was the daughter I had spent 20 years pretending did not exist. But that is not even the worst part of this story. The worst part is what we discovered about Evelyn. What my children found out when they went to her with their own questions. The secret she had been keeping from all of us, from me, from our children, from herself, for the entire length of our marriage. A secret that made everything we thought we knew about our family collapse a second time, harder than the first. My name is Daniel Mercer. And I am standing at my wife's grave right now. She has been gone 7 months. And I am still trying to understand how two people who loved each other as much as we did could destroy each other so completely, without ever once meaning to. This is that story. Stay with me. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want you to hold 3 questions in your mind as this story unfolds. The first question is this: how does a man who loves his wife, who has never looked for anything outside his marriage, end up responsible for a child with another woman, a woman who lived inside his own home? The second question is this: how does a family that every single person in the neighborhood held up as the perfect example of what a marriage should look like fall completely apart in a single afternoon? And the third question, the one that will stay with you long after this video ends, is this: what was Evelyn Mercer hiding? Because Daniel was not the only one in that marriage carrying a secret. He just did not know it yet. There are 5 people at the center of this story. There is Daniel Mercer, husband, father, the narrator of everything you are about to hear. There is Evelyn Mercer, his wife of over 30 years, the woman he loved completely, the woman the neighborhood adored, the woman with a secret she took almost to her grave. There is Rachel, the young nanny who came to work in the Mercer home when the children were small, and who left carrying something none of them fully understood. There is Lily, Rachel's daughter, 20 years old when this story reaches its turning point, the child Daniel never knew existed, the stranger who saved his life. And there are Marcus, Aaron, and Diane, the 3 children Daniel raised and loved and eventually lost, who would discover something about their own identities that shook them to the very foundation of who they believed themselves to be. To understand what this story cost, you first have to understand what was there before it was taken away. Because what Daniel and Evelyn Mercer had was not a performance. It was not a carefully maintained image. It was something real, built across decades of ordinary mornings and difficult seasons, and the kind of quiet, steady love that most people spend their entire lives searching for and never quite find. They met in their mid-20s at a church community event in Columbus, Ohio. Daniel was 26. Evelyn was 24. He saw her laughing across the room, a full, unguarded laugh that had nothing to do with who was watching, and he told himself that whoever ended up beside that woman for the rest of their life was going to be the luckiest person alive. 11 months later, he was that person. They married on a Saturday in June, in a small ceremony that everyone who attended still speaks about warmly to this day. Daniel worked in corporate logistics management, not glamorous work, but serious work that required precision, accountability, and showing up every single day regardless of how you felt. He moved steadily upward over 15 years, not through luck but through the kind of consistency that is its own form of character. Evelyn taught third grade for over a decade, and anyone who has ever spent time in a third grade classroom knows that the patience required for that work is not something you can fake. They bought a house in a quiet Columbus suburb when Marcus was 2 years old. Evelyn tended a garden every Sunday morning. They hosted Sunday dinners the whole extended family attended. They had a rhythm to their life that felt, from the outside and from the inside, like something that had been built to last. Nobody who knew the Mercer family would have predicted what was coming. That is the point. Nobody ever does. 3 children came along over the years. Marcus was the eldest, serious, responsible, the kind of boy who became the kind of man other men trusted without needing to be told why. Aaron came 2 years later, quieter and more interior, with a sharp mind and a careful way of observing the world before deciding what he thought about it. And then Diane, the youngest, who had her mother's laugh and her father's stubbornness and who lit up every room she walked into from the time she was old enough to walk. Daniel will tell you without hesitation that raising those 3 children was the greatest accomplishment of his life. Not his career. Not his reputation in the neighborhood. His children. That is always his answer when you ask him what he is most proud of. His children. Which is what makes the rest of this story so unbearably complicated. The neighborhood noticed the Mercers. That is not an exaggeration or a detail added for effect, it was something Daniel and Evelyn heard regularly and directly from the people around them. Couples going through difficulty would come to them for advice. Parents who were struggling would watch how Daniel and Evelyn handled their children and try to replicate what they saw. Young married couples would point to the Mercer house at the end of the block and say, openly and without embarrassment, that it was what they hoped to one day build for themselves. There is a particular kind of quiet pride that comes from being that family. Daniel felt it. Evelyn felt it. And as he knows now, looking back at all of it, that pride carried a shadow, because when everyone believes you are perfect, the cost of admitting you are not becomes impossibly high. That cost is important. Remember it. Rachel came into their lives when Diane was about 2 years old and Evelyn had gone back to part-time teaching. Rachel was 23, came with strong references, and had a natural ease with children that Evelyn recognized and trusted immediately. She lived in the Mercer home during the week and returned to her own family on weekends. For nearly 3 years, Rachel was a consistent, warm, and reliable presence in that household. She helped with the children, was respectful toward Daniel, and was good at her work in the quiet way of someone who does not need credit for what they do well. There was no tension in those 3 years. No drama. No signal that Daniel or Evelyn could have pointed to later and said, "There it is, that was the warning." There was nothing. Just ordinary life, moving forward the way ordinary life does, until the Saturday evening it stopped. Daniel wants you to understand something before this next part of the story, and he wants it stated plainly because it matters. He was not pursuing Rachel. He was not attracted to her in any way he ever acted on. What happened between them was not the slow result of something building beneath the surface over months of closeness and proximity. It was one night. One Saturday evening that began as a perfectly ordinary neighborhood gathering at the Mercer home, the kind of backyard event they hosted every couple of months, where friends and neighbors came over and the evening stretched longer than anyone planned. By 9 o'clock most guests had gone home. Evelyn had taken the children upstairs and fallen asleep early with a headache. Daniel stayed downstairs with the remaining guests and kept drinking long after he should have stopped. By the time he finally went upstairs, he was in no condition to know where he was or who was beside him. Rachel had come upstairs earlier that evening to check on something for Evelyn and had simply fallen asleep on top of the covers, exhausted, not intending to be there, not aware of how late it had gotten. She was not in that bed the way a woman is in a bed when she means to be found. She was simply there, in the wrong place, at the worst possible time. Daniel got into his bed in the dark, in his own room, in his own home, and assumed without question, the way a man assumes in his own house after years of marriage, that the person beside him was his wife Evelyn. He never turned on the light. He never looked. He was wrong. And he would not know he was wrong for weeks. He woke up the next morning and went about his life with no idea that anything had changed. He had no reason to think otherwise. He was in his own home. He had absolutely no idea. The weeks that followed were ordinary. Rachel continued working. The children continued their routines. Evelyn continued teaching and tending her garden and cooking Sunday dinners. And then one morning, quietly and without any warning, Rachel told Evelyn she was pregnant. Evelyn asked gently about the situation, assuming the most natural explanation, that it involved someone from Rachel's personal life. Rachel was evasive in a way that went beyond embarrassment. Quiet in a specific way that Evelyn, after 3 years of knowing her, recognized as something deeper than shyness. She pressed her gently across several conversations. And eventually Rachel told her the truth. She told Evelyn what had happened that Saturday night. She said she had said nothing because she was terrified. She said she did not know what to do. And the kitchen went quiet in the way kitchens go quiet when something has been said that can never be taken back. Daniel came home that evening to find Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table with Rachel across from her. He felt before anyone spoke that something fundamental had shifted in that room. Evelyn looked at him with an expression he had never seen from her before and has never been able to fully describe since, not anger, not grief, but something that lived between those two things and was somehow worse than either. Rachel told him what she had told Evelyn. Daniel sat at that table and did not speak for a very long time. When he finally did, he said over and over that he had not known. That he had believed he was in bed beside his wife. That he would never, that he could not have, that this was not something he had chosen or wanted. The words came out of him the way words come out of a man who understands that nothing he says will be enough, but who cannot bring himself to say nothing at all. Evelyn listened to all of it. And when he finished, she said in the flattest, most controlled voice he had ever heard from her that Rachel needed to leave. That this would not leave these walls. And that was the end of the conversation. Within the week, Rachel was gone. She said goodbye to the children, collected her things, and walked out of the Mercer home. Neither Daniel nor Evelyn watched her go for long. They told themselves it was the only option. They told themselves it was handled. They buried it, both of them, together and separately, and went back to being the family that everyone admired. And for 20 years, not one word was spoken about Rachel, about the pregnancy, about the child who had been sent away before either of them knew what they were truly sending away. 20 years of Sunday dinners and grandchildren and garden mornings and the quiet, ordinary continuation of a life that looked, from every possible angle, exactly like what it had always been. 20 years. And then the doorbell rang. 20 years is how long it takes for a buried thing to grow roots strong enough to break through the surface of a life. The Mercer family had continued to thrive in the years after Rachel left. The children finished school and built their own lives. Marcus married a woman named Renee and started a family. Aaron had built a steady career and was still navigating his personal life with the same quiet carefulness that had always defined him. Diane married a man named Patrick who adored her completely. Grandchildren came. The Sunday dinners kept going. Evelyn's garden was, if anything, more beautiful than it had ever been. Daniel had moved into senior management and was beginning to think seriously about slowing down, about what retirement might look like, about all the things people tell themselves they will do when the children are grown and the mortgage is paid. From every angle, the Mercer family still looked exactly like what the neighborhood had always believed it was. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. Daniel had come home early from a meeting. The house was quiet in the way it only gets quiet on weekday afternoons when you have lived somewhere long enough that the silence itself feels like company. Evelyn was in the kitchen. He could smell whatever she was cooking from the hallway, that particular smell so familiar it stops registering as a smell and becomes simply the smell of home. He stood there for a moment and thought, with complete and genuine sincerity, that his life was good. That whatever the years had taken from him, whatever quiet distance had settled between him and Evelyn over time, his life was still genuinely good. He believed that. And then the doorbell rang. He walked to the front door and opened it, and his life divided permanently into two parts, the part before that moment, and everything that came after. Rachel had aged, but Daniel recognized her the instant he saw her. The same careful posture. The same eyes. But she was not who he was looking at. Standing beside her was a young woman who appeared to be about 20 years old. Tall. Dark-eyed. She held herself with a quality of stillness that Daniel recognized without being able to explain, the way you recognize something you have encountered before but cannot immediately place. She was looking at him with an expression that was not angry, not desperate, but patient and searching and deeply serious. He stood in his own doorway and felt something shift inside him. Not the floor beneath his feet. The floor inside him. The thing that holds everything else up. Rachel said, "I am sorry to come here like this. I tried to find another way. But I did not have another way." She placed her hand on the young woman's shoulder. "This is Lily. She is 20 years old. And she needs to know her father." Daniel stood in the doorway and heard those words and felt something inside him go completely still, the way water goes still just before something large moves beneath the surface. He heard Evelyn's footsteps in the hallway behind him. She came around the corner with a dish towel in her hands. When she saw Rachel standing on the porch, the towel dropped from her fingers to the floor. She did not bend to pick it up. She did not speak. She just stood there, and Daniel saw on her face the same expression she had worn 20 years ago at the kitchen table. He understood in that instant that she had always known this day might come. Rachel explained everything in the living room, slowly and without drama, the way someone explains something they have rehearsed many times over many years. She had moved away after leaving the Mercer home, eventually settled in another city, eventually married a man named David. She had raised Lily without telling her the truth about her biological father because she believed, at the time, that it was the right thing to do. She had tried to build a quiet life and keep it quiet. But David, the man Lily had known as her stepfather since she was small, had never been kind to her. Rachel used the word mistreating. She said it plainly, without elaboration. Lily's expression did not change when the word was spoken. That stillness, that practiced absence of reaction when a painful word lands, told Daniel more about what the girl had endured than any further explanation could have. Lily had started asking questions, Rachel said. The kind of questions a young woman asks when she begins to understand that the story she has been told about herself is incomplete. They were not small questions and they did not stop when the subject was changed. After 20 years of carrying this alone, Rachel had run out of a good enough reason to keep lying to her own daughter. So she came back. She came back to the house she had left 2 decades earlier and stood on that porch and told the truth, the way the truth usually arrives, not gradually, not gently, but all at once on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when nobody is prepared for it. Daniel looked at Lily and she looked back at him with those quiet, patient eyes. She did not look angry or desperate. She looked like someone who had been waiting a very long time for something she had already decided she deserved, and who had made peace with having to wait as long as it took. He said, "Come inside." Evelyn walked back into the kitchen without a word. Daniel heard a cabinet close softly. Then silence. The kind of silence that means a person is standing in a room trying to decide how to survive the next hour. Marcus called during that conversation, a routine midweek check-in, and Daniel told him quietly that he needed to come to the house. That it was important. Marcus heard something in his father's voice and did not ask questions. By the following morning, all 3 children knew. Daniel told them himself, one by one, sitting across from each of them in his own living room, saying the words he had hoped he would never have to say. He told them everything, the Saturday night, the drinking, the confusion, Rachel's pregnancy, the decision to send her away. He did not minimize it. He did not frame it to make himself more sympathetic. He told them the plain truth and let them receive it however they needed to. The reaction was colder than anger. It was something more difficult to navigate than anger, because anger eventually burns down to something you can talk through. This was a slow, deliberate withdrawal, the way a tide pulls back before something enormous arrives. Marcus sat across from Daniel at his own dining table and said, very quietly, "Dad, I do not even know who I am looking at right now." Aaron said almost nothing, which was somehow worse than any words could have been. Diane cried, but not in front of her father. She went into a bedroom to collect herself and Daniel could hear her through the wall, muffled, controlled, trying not to be heard, and that sound, that particular sound of a daughter trying to hold herself together on the other side of a wall from her father, was one of the worst things he has ever experienced in 61 years of living. Daniel tried to deny it. Not because he believed he could sustain a denial, but because denial is the last wall a man builds before he has nothing left to stand behind. He said he was not certain. He said he needed proof. Lily agreed to the DNA test without any hesitation, as if she had already expected he would ask and had decided in advance she would not hold it against him. 3 weeks later the results came back. She was his. Every percentage point, every biological marker. She was his daughter, and there was not a single measurement left to hide behind. Daniel sat with that report in his hands for a long time. Long enough to understand that his life had permanently divided into 2 parts, the part before that envelope, and the part after. And everything that followed was going to happen in the after. What followed was 2 years that Daniel describes as the longest silence of his life. His sons came to visit Evelyn regularly. They sat with her, ate with her, laughed with her in the kitchen in the evenings the way they always had. When Daniel walked in, the conversation stopped. Not dramatically, not with a hostile exit, just stopped, the way sound stops when a door closes somewhere else in the house. As if his presence had become something they were managing rather than something they were welcoming. Marcus was civil because civility was woven into his nature, but his eyes were somewhere Daniel could not reach. Aaron was present in body and absent in every other way that mattered. Diane's visits grew shorter with each passing week. She would arrive, kiss her mother, sit for an hour, and leave without looking at Daniel on her way out the door. He watched this happen week after week, and there was nothing he could do except watch and keep showing up anyway. He called them. All 3 of them, consistently, for 2 years. He called Marcus on Sunday afternoons the way he always had, and listened to his own voice go to voicemail. He called Aaron on Tuesday evenings because that had always been their night to check in, and held the phone to his ear through the ringing. He called Diane, and sometimes she answered in a careful, polite voice that was more painful than silence would have been, the voice she used with strangers, and he recognized that, and it cost him something each time to hear it. He wrote letters. Actual letters, written by hand, because he had run out of other tools. He wrote about the Saturday night and what he remembered and what he did not. He wrote about how he had told himself for 20 years that the right thing was to leave it buried. He wrote about how wrong he had been. He wrote about how sorry he was. Not one of those letters was answered. He kept writing them anyway. Evelyn stayed in the house. That was the thing that kept the thinnest thread of hope alive in Daniel through all of it. She did not leave. She did not ask him to go. She slept in the same bedroom, sat in the garden on Sunday mornings, cooked in the kitchen, and moved through the daily routines of their shared life with a thoroughness that was either loyalty or something she was enduring. Daniel was never entirely certain which. They did not speak about Rachel. They did not speak about Lily. They did not speak about the Saturday night or the 20 years of silence that followed it. They spoke about ordinary things and moved around each other in the house with the careful precision of 2 people who understood that certain subjects could not be safely approached. Daniel held on to her presence the way a man holds on to whatever is close enough to grip when the water is rising. He told himself, if she stayed, there was still something worth saving. Lily, in the meantime, had found her own quiet way into the edges of the Mercer family without demanding or pushing. She and Daniel had begun meeting for coffee occasionally, careful, tentative conversations in which both of them were slowly learning what the other was made of. He found her to be a person of unusual steadiness. Someone who had grown up without the things she deserved and had decided somewhere along the way to build her own foundation rather than spend her life resenting the one she had been denied. He admired that in her. He admired her. He will tell you that getting to know Lily during those 2 dark years was one of the few things that felt, in an otherwise very dark season, like something moving in the right direction. The human body keeps an honest account even when the mind refuses to. Daniel had been feeling unwell for months before he admitted it to anyone, a fatigue that rest did not fix, a heaviness that had settled somewhere deeper than muscle, a persistent wrongness he kept attributing to stress, to age, to the weight of 2 years of estrangement from the people he loved most. He put off the doctor the way people put off the things they are afraid of, postponing until one morning he woke up and knew without any ambiguity that something was wrong in a way that could not be waited out. Evelyn called the ambulance herself. He remembers her voice from across the room, calm, clear, giving their address and describing his symptoms in precise, factual terms. That was the voice she used in a crisis. He had heard it twice before in their marriage. And hearing it in that moment, lying on the floor of their bedroom unable to stand, he felt something shift slightly toward the light. Whatever wall had gone up between them, whatever distance those years had created, when it mattered most, she was still, in the place that counted, his wife. All 3 children came to the hospital. That was the first time in 2 years that Marcus, Aaron, and Diane were all in the same room with their father, and the circumstances were too urgent and too frightening for anyone to maintain the careful distances they had built. The doctors said Daniel needed blood transfusions immediately and asked about compatible family donors. Marcus went first. He sat in that donation chair straight-backed, no drama, not looking for any credit for what he was doing. They ran the compatibility tests. And then a nurse came back into the room with an expression that no one in that family was prepared for. The blood was not compatible. Not a minor mismatch, incompatible in a way that stopped the process entirely and required a physician before anyone said another word. Aaron went next. Same result. Then Diane, and when her results came back, the nurse looked at the chart for just a moment longer than she should have. Same result again. 3 children. 3 separate tests. Not one compatible match among them. The room went quiet in a way that rooms only go quiet when everyone present understands simultaneously that something is deeply wrong, but no one yet has the courage to say out loud what that something might be. 3 people who had been raised in the same house, who had eaten at the same table, who had grown up believing without question that they knew exactly who they were and where they came from. And not one of them could give their father what he needed to survive. That moment of silence in that hospital corridor is the one that Marcus has never spoken about publicly. Daniel does not press him on it. Some moments belong entirely to the person who lived them. Lily was in the waiting room. She had not announced her arrival or asked for permission to come. She had heard from Rachel that Daniel was ill and had decided, privately and on her own, that she was going to be there. Daniel did not know she had come until a nurse mentioned it in passing. When the request was made of her, careful, gentle, explaining what was needed, Lily stood up immediately and said without any hesitation, "Of course." She followed the nurse down the corridor. Her blood matched. Completely and precisely, in the way that only family matches. The transfusion was given. The doctors said afterward that the timing had mattered critically, that finding a compatible donor when they did had made a measurable difference in how quickly Daniel stabilized. He lay in that hospital bed and thought about the fact that the child he had never claimed, the daughter he had sent away before she was born, was the only reason he was still breathing. Marcus Mercer is not a man who leaves a question unanswered when the question matters. While Daniel was still recovering, Marcus went back to the attending physician and asked her directly why 3 adult children of the same man could all fail to produce a compatible blood match while a woman who shared only one biological parent had matched perfectly. The doctor said the pattern was statistically unusual enough that if he had questions about paternity, a formal DNA test would give him definitive answers. Marcus thanked her, walked back to the waiting room, and sat down between his brother and sister. He told them what the doctor had said. None of the three spoke for a long time. Then Aaron said very quietly, "We need to know." Diane nodded. And all three of them went to their father's bedside and told him what they had decided. Marcus sat beside the hospital bed and told Daniel what the doctor had said and what the three of them needed to do. His voice carried the weight of a man who has already prepared himself for the worst answer and made his peace with needing the truth more than he needs comfort. He said, "Dad, I need to know. And I think you do too." Daniel looked at his son and said, "Yes. Do what you need to do." And in the deepest place inside himself, the place he had not allowed himself to look, he already knew. He had known from the moment the first compatibility result came back. He simply had not been ready to say it out loud. All three children submitted to DNA testing. The results came back across the course of a week. One result, then 2 days later another, then the third. Each time the answer was the same. Negative. 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 Not one of the three children that Daniel Mercer had raised for over 30 years, loved without reservation, and considered the greatest accomplishment of his existence carried his biological DNA. Not Marcus. Not Aaron. Not Diane. Only Lily did. The child who had grown up without him. The daughter he had been told about only 2 years before. The young woman whose blood had just saved his life. She was the only biological child he had. Daniel received the final result in that hospital bed and read the paper and set it on the blanket and stared at the window and did not speak. There are no words adequate to that moment. He has never tried to find them. His children went to Evelyn. Daniel was not in the room for that conversation and he remains grateful for it. He was told about it afterward in pieces, by Marcus, who delivered each detail the way you carry something fragile, carefully, slowly, with both hands. Evelyn had been deeply involved, in the years before her marriage to Daniel, with another man. That relationship had ended badly. She had eventually moved on, met Daniel, and begun building a life with him. What she had not done, what she had not found the courage to do, was examine with complete honesty the question of timing. There had been weeks of overlap between the end of that previous relationship and the beginning of her time with Daniel. A window of uncertainty she had never allowed herself to look at directly. She had made a private, unilateral decision to believe that the family she and Daniel were building was complete and entirely theirs, and she had kept that decision locked away for 35 years, in the same place that Daniel had kept Rachel. They had both been keeping the same kind of secret. Neither of them had ever said a word to the other. The response from the children was not anger in any simple sense. It was the specific devastation that arrives when the story you have always believed about yourself is built on ground that was never as solid as you thought. Everything Marcus and Aaron and Diane understood about their own identities had shifted in the span of a week. Their history, their inheritance, their sense of where they came from, all of it had moved beneath them. Marcus went home and did not speak to anyone for 3 days. Aaron fell apart in a way Daniel had never seen from him. Diane's husband Patrick called Daniel, not to assign blame, but because he genuinely did not know what else to do, and said that his wife was not doing well and could Daniel please reach out. Daniel called. Diane answered. She said Dad, and then said nothing else for a full minute. He told her he loved her. She said she knew. The call ended. That silence said everything. They turned on Evelyn. Daniel says this without condemnation and without asking anyone to judge his children for it. They had spent 2 years directing their pain at their father and they had been right to. He had done something that deserved their grief and he had accepted that. But now the story had turned. The mother they had protected and consoled and rallied around for 2 years had been carrying something of her own. Something that touched them at a deeper level than Daniel's mistake had, because this was about who they were. Not just about what had been done. About who they were. Evelyn had been the keeper of their story, and they discovered that she had kept part of it locked away from all of them, including from herself. The shame landed on her like something physical. Daniel watched it happening day by day, and there was nothing he could do but try to reach her, and find, every time he tried, that she was a little further away than she had been the time before. Evelyn Mercer stopped going to the garden on Sunday mornings. That was the first concrete sign that something had changed beyond the grief Daniel had already been watching. That garden had been hers for over 30 years. Rain or shine, every Sunday morning, she had been out there in her boots and gloves doing the quiet work of keeping something alive. And then one Sunday it did not happen. Then another. She stopped cooking. She stopped answering the phone. She sat in the bedroom with the curtains drawn for long hours, and when Daniel came in to check on her she would look at him with eyes that had a quality he had never seen from her before, not sadness exactly, but the look of a person who has come to the end of a very long road and no longer has the energy to pretend there is more road ahead. Daniel tried to reach her in every way he knew how. He told her he forgave her, completely, without conditions, without reservation. He told her that what she had carried was not so different from what he had carried, and that he had loved her through his own buried secret and he would love her through hers. He told her their children would find their way back, that Marcus and Aaron and Diane were good people who had been shaken by something enormous, and that good people, given enough time, always find their way back to love. He told her about Lily, about her patience and her steadiness, and said that this family, broken and rearranged as it was, could still become something worth staying for. He said these things every single day. Some days she nodded. Some days she looked at the window and said nothing. And every day she seemed slightly further away than she had been the day before, traveling somewhere he could not follow. He found the letter on a Thursday morning. It was on the kitchen table, folded inside a plain white envelope with his name written on the front in Evelyn's careful, deliberate cursive, the same handwriting she had used for their wedding invitations, for the birthday cards she made by hand, for every letter she had ever written that was meant to last. He stood at that kitchen table for a long time before he picked it up. He stood there long enough to understand that whatever was inside that envelope had already happened, and that the moment he opened it he would be living in a world he could not undo. He opened it anyway. A man does not leave his wife's last letter on a kitchen table. She was gone. She had taken her own life in the early hours of that Thursday morning. The letter was 2 pages, written in full, in her careful hand. It was not angry. It was not bitter. It was the most heartbreaking thing Daniel Mercer has ever held in his hands. She wrote about the shame, not the original secret, but the shame of being seen. The shame of her children looking at her the way they had looked at Daniel during the 2 years of silence. She wrote that she had spent her whole life being the person this family depended on to hold everything together, and that once her children needed to hold her accountable rather than depend on her, she did not know who she was without the role. She wrote that she was exhausted in a way that sleep had stopped reaching. She wrote that she was sorry, for the secret, for the silence, for not finding the courage to tell the truth when telling it might still have changed something. And then she wrote that she had loved Daniel from the first moment she saw him. That the love had never been a performance. That whatever else had been complicated or broken, the love had always been entirely real. And she asked him, in the last words she ever wrote to him, to please forgive her. Daniel does not remember much of the hours that followed finding that letter. He remembers calling Marcus. He remembers Marcus arriving and the sound of his son's voice from the other room. He remembers sitting on the back step of the house in Evelyn's garden, looking at the plants she would never tend again. The rest of that day exists in fragments, the arrival of people, the necessary conversations, the formal things that follow a death and give the body something to do while the mind tries to catch up with what has happened. He moved through all of it. People told him he was strong. He did not feel strong. He felt like a man who had discovered too late that the price of silence is always higher than the price of the conversation you were afraid to have. It has been 7 months since they buried Evelyn Mercer, and Daniel comes to her grave every Thursday. He chose Thursdays because that was the day everything became permanent, and he has not found a better way to spend that day than here, talking to her the way he should have talked to her when she was alive. He tells her about the week. About the grandchildren. About the garden, he has been trying to maintain it himself, has learned more about plants in 7 months than in the previous 35 years combined, and he suspects she would find that both deeply touching and slightly ridiculous. He tells her about Marcus, who called him last week on a Sunday afternoon for the first time in a long while, not about anything important, just to talk the way fathers and sons talk when the hard season has begun to soften. He tells her about Aaron, who finally agreed to see a counselor, which Daniel considers a quiet personal victory. He tells her about Diane, who brought her children over last month and let them sit in his lap and tell him about their school projects. And he sat in that chair holding those grandchildren and felt, for the first time since October, that the ground beneath him was solid enough to trust. He tells her about Lily. How she has become a careful and unhurried presence at the edge of the family, not demanding entry, not requiring formal welcome, simply remaining available with the patient steadiness that seems to be her fundamental nature. She and Marcus had a long conversation 3 months ago, and Marcus called Daniel afterward and said only, "She is good people, Dad." That was enough. He tells Evelyn that he understands now, in a way he did not at the time, why she never told him. He understands the mathematics of a secret that has been kept long enough, how after a certain number of years the telling feels more dangerous than the keeping, how the longer you carry it the more convinced you become that opening the door will only cause damage with no corresponding relief. He lived inside that same mathematics for 20 years. He had kept Rachel in the same place Evelyn had kept her secret, with the same reasoning: the past is the past, what is done cannot be undone, the only merciful thing is to leave it buried. He had been wrong. She had been wrong. They had both been wrong in exactly the same way, at exactly the same time, and they had never once said so to each other across 35 years of sharing a bed and a table and a life. That is what he thinks about most on Thursday afternoons. Not the secrets themselves. What the silence between them cost. Daniel thinks about the night Lily's blood ran through his veins and kept him alive. He thinks about what it means that the only child who carries his DNA, the child he never knew, the child he sent away before she was born, the child who grew up without a father who knew her name, was sitting in that hospital waiting room on the exact day he needed her most. He does not reach easily for the language of miracles. But he will tell you honestly that it does not feel like a coincidence. It feels like the universe, or God, or whatever word you use for the force that arranges these things, insisting that nothing is wasted. Not even the worst things. Not even the things that cost everything. He is going to walk home now. Lily is making dinner. She does this every Thursday. She comes to the house while Daniel is at the cemetery and has food on the table by the time he returns. She does not know he chose Thursdays for these visits because of the letter. She just comes. Every week. She lets herself in with the key Daniel gave her, cooks from scratch, and has it ready when he walks through the door. She always asks how he is when he sits down. She always means it. She always waits for the real answer rather than the polite one. He sits at that table, the same table where Rachel once sat and told the truth that changed everything, and he eats, and he lets himself be cared for by the daughter he was too afraid to claim for 20 years. It is not the life he planned. None of it resembles what he imagined when he was a young man watching a woman laugh across a room and thinking he was about to become the luckiest person alive. But it is still a life. It is still his. And after everything, after all of this, that is not nothing. That is everything. Before you go, I want to ask you something and I want your honest answer in the comments below. If you were Evelyn, if you had carried a secret like that for 35 years, and the cost of telling the truth felt like losing everything you had spent your life building, would you have found the courage to say it? And if you were Daniel, standing at that grave with your wife's last letter in your hands, knowing everything you now know, could you have forgiven her? Drop your answer below. Every single comment gets read. If this story moved you, if it made you sit with something you have been putting off, or think about a conversation you have been too afraid to have, let it mean something. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because there are people watching this right now who are sitting on a secret that is costing them more than they are willing to admit. Maybe this is the story that finally moves them. Before we go, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because next week, I am going to tell you about a woman who spent 18 years believing her husband was the most loyal man she had ever known, right up until the afternoon his other family knocked on her front door. That story will change the way you think about trust forever. You do not want to miss it. I am your narrator. This has been Hidden Intent Stories. Thank you for staying until the very end. Remember, the most dangerous secrets are never the ones kept by strangers. They are the ones kept by the people who sleep beside you every night.